مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. ماذا عرفوا ومتى عرفوه؟ هذان السؤالان الشهيران اللذان سألهما صحفيان من واشنطن بوست قبل ما يقرب من نصف قرن، واليوم يسأل الصحفيون نفس السؤالين حول الصلات بين مسؤولين كبار في الحملة الانتخابية الرئاسية لدونالد ترامب، من بينهم ابنه، وأشخاص يمثلون الحكومة الروسية. ربما تكون هذه أزمة فارغة بلا أساس ولا مضمون، وذلك موقف البيت الأبيض وأنصار الرئيس ترامب. أو ربما كما يقول المثل: لا دخان بلا نار. إنها ستكون مهمة رجل واحد، المدعي الخاص روبرت ميلر، المدير السابق لمكتب التحقيقات الفيدرالي، أن يكتشف الحقيقة. من هو روبرت ميلر؟ وكيف أوليت إليه مسؤولية تقرير مصير الرئاسة؟ وكيف تؤثر هذه الأزمة على سير العمل اليومي في إدارة ترامب؟ لمناقشة التحقيق في التدخل الروسي في النظام السياسي الأميركي وتأثيره على حكومتنا وشؤوننا السياسية، يسرني أن أرحب بلجنتنا التي تدعم الخبيرين السياسيين نورمان أورنستين وستيف كليمنز. Welcome back to Dakhel Washington. Today we're talking about the Russia investigation and the Trump administration. This is, in the view of many observers, one of the most important presidential investigations since Watergate, the crisis that took down the Nixon administration 50 years ago. So today, with our panelists, Norm Ornstein and Steve Clemens, gentlemen, let's talk a bit first context. What is this all about? Norm?
This is multifaceted. It starts with a recognition that our entire intelligence establishment has did during the campaign and since, of a pattern of massive Russian interference in our elections. It was interference that came from hacking into and getting emails from the Democratic National Committee, from the other congressional campaign committees, from a prominent figure in the Clinton campaign, John Podesta, turning them over to WikiLeaks and having them selectively leaked at different times in a way that shaped elements of the election. It gets to the Russians moving into the voter registration systems and into voting machines themselves and possibly hacking into those. But of course, that's one thing. A connection with this kind of activity to a political campaign in the United States and the winning presidential campaign takes us to another level. And we are now going deep into investigating what ties, relationships, communications there were between officials in the Trump campaign and possibly Trump himself with Russian operatives. Was there coordination? Was there collusion? And all of that would be illegal and would be quite insidious. And we also know that there are multiple financial relationships that the Trump organization and the Trump family have had with Russians, including oligarchs and in some cases organized crime figures, and investigating whether there was money laundering, whether there were other kinds of financial relations. All of those things are being looked at by Mueller, our special counsel, and his team that includes forensic accountants, money laundering specialists, and others.
The short form issue is whether, I think the real fundamental issue that we're facing in the country is right now is, has the White House been compromised by Russia? Did they, as Norm just pointed out, collude with the Russians along the way? Because on top of all the stuff that Norm just laid out, we saw very unusual behaviors and positions of President Trump, then candidate Trump, through the campaign, a kind of Russia hugging that seemed uncomfortable for a lot of Americans, certainly the Republican national security establishment was very uncomfortable with kind of these rewards to Russia, despite Russia's behavior in Ukraine, its hacking, other kinds of things that were percolating, and then bold statements that no one in the Trump campaign or Trump family had had any financial relationships with Russia, nor had had any connections or communications. We now know that those statements are lies, that so many people around Donald Trump not only had communications, but had mega meetings. And I think in that it has created a question mark as to whether Donald Trump is somehow colluding with Vladimir Putin and the Russian establishment at odds with the interests of the United States. And that's at the fundamental core of what this big question mark is.
So let me put the what we would say the $64,000 question out right at the outset here. Is there really any serious evidence that's been presented in public that suggests that Donald J. Trump colluded with the Russian government to facilitate his victory?
There is evidence that his son was interested in colluding. There is a what we would call in America a smoking gun. You know, a set of communications between Donald Trump Jr., who jumped at the chance to meet with people who were identified as representing Russian government interests, as having had political dirt on Hillary Clinton. And this is something that no campaign, no legitimate campaign, would have taken the meeting. They would have immediately called the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So we have in clear evidence, not only evidence that the Paul Manafort, the chairman of the campaign, Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, and Donald Trump Jr. jumped at the opportunity to have this mega meeting on this subject of this. And so one suspects that, depending on how you do it, they say there's nothing more, that's all there is. Many of us don't quite believe that, and that's why you need a Robert Mueller and you need an investigation to go at what was the second bit of email exchange? What was the follow-up? Was this a gold vein? Because after that meeting, things began to happen about the dumping of John Podesta's emails and the behavior at the Cleveland convention where at the Republican Platform Committee, a single provision was the only one of interest to the Donald Trump, which they tried to strike a provision that called for Ukraine to be sold weapon systems that it could use to defend itself. And I think that those circumstantial pieces of it met this email. And so yes, there's evidence of that. There's not the evidence yet that directly links the president, but that's why we have an investigation.
I actually think there is evidence, and it was right in front of our eyes. Donald Trump, in public during the campaign, said to the Russians, please get out there and hack more emails and find those 33,000 emails from Hillary Clinton that seem to have disappeared. He directly encouraged Russian illegal involvement in American politics. That fits my definition of collusion. You don't have to do it through secret backroom categories.
So I have to ask, if it was public in front of 100 million Americans, people still voted for the guy.
Mostly what we know is that the Russian hacking and the Russian illegal activities did not become a major part of the campaign. And here's one other thing that we know. And I could mention a bunch, but we know that the intelligence agencies met with the top leaders in Congress and President Obama and laid out compelling evidence of what the Russians were doing. And the Republican leader in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, said, if you go public with this, I will undermine it, I will say it's illegitimate, I will say that all this is an attempt to sway the election to Hillary Clinton, and I will delegitimize all of you. And that was blackmail, and it worked. So we got almost no discussion of what the Russians were doing during the course of the campaign. And most Americans had no clue.
And I just want to emphasize what Norm said is exactly right, but this is where I do fault President Obama. President Obama should not have been cowed at that moment. I remember when we talked about this way back then, that I was very critical of President Obama of not having stepped up before, not having done more, and everyone trying to game what they think will be the reaction. But we live in a system, in a democracy, where these institutions are very important and people should play their roles and be straightforward and honest with what happened. That didn't happen with President Obama. So he was, in a way, unintentionally complicit with the conditions that we got, which I think Donald Trump is now exploiting.
So lots of questions, but let me first, so we can explain for our viewers, we normally have a system of government with an attorney general, with congressional investigations, but we now have these new institutions and new people that have emerged as key players. Why do we have a special prosecutor or special counsel? Who is Robert Mueller, and why does he matter in this circumstance?
Well, in particular, we have Robert Mueller for a couple of reasons. One, the current Attorney General of the United States, Jeff Sessions, lied about connections and meetings with the Russians, and he then agreed in all of the matters related to potential investigation to recuse himself. So the next active person became Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, who became tied up in one way or another in the firing of FBI Director James Comey, and was used for a day by Donald Trump to say that Rosenstein had actually recommended the firing of FBI Director James Comey, who was also investigating this Russia matter. And I think Donald Trump was feeling the heat from Comey, and he fired this man. It created controversy. So you had two people in the eyes of the world now disqualified, worried about their objectivity. And that firing led to Rosenstein saying, I can't have this, that we need an independent person who has independent authorities or semi-independent authorities to lead this. And so they went to Robert Mueller, who is the second longest serving FBI director to J. Edgar Hoover, served under Republicans and Democrats, very well thought of, and very tough, and I think respected by both sides of the political aisle. And so they got someone who is an iconic legal force and gave this power to him because other people in the system had been compromised. Is that square, Norm?
We're going to have to hold back. When we come back, I'm going to ask you, is this really all in the hands now of Robert Mueller? We'll come back and continue this conversation in just a moment. So, Norm, is this entire investigation all going to come down to the decision of one man, Robert Mueller?
Robert Mueller has a team of people, and he's looking into a wide range of activities of the president, his family, and other people around them. And he's brought together the all-star team, and he's a pivotal figure now. But we know that President Trump has been speculating about firing him, says it's unfair, says that some of the people who Mueller brought in, a couple of instances, they had made campaign contributions to Democrats in the past, sees it as biased, but it's mostly a fear that this A-team of investigators is going to get way too close to him. And he threatened that if they started to investigate his finances, that would be the end of it. So we may have Mueller fired before very long. But if Mueller is not fired, and if he is, Congress could theoretically step up and pass a law re-implementing his mandate and bringing him back. If he's not fired, there are a lot of areas he's exploring that would make the Trump administration and the people around them pretty uneasy. So and we know there are other elements of this, by the way, that could result in charges to Jared Kushner, the son-in-law, who for failing to disclose his foreign contacts, to Donald Trump Jr., to the entire family. There's a lot going on here, and Mueller's in the middle of it.
Just to be clear, ultimately, what does Robert Mueller decide? Is it up to him to issue indictments? Is it up to him to issue a report to somebody else? What does he do?
Report to Congress. He can make recommendations, but he has no formal authority to indict the president. What he has is incredible investigative powers and sort of a moral stature to come in and subpoena, to bring people to account, to hold people accountable for perjury if they lied through this process, and he can take all that material and give it to the Congress, therefore, to act.
And how long do we think this investigation will go on?
We don't know. Mueller is going to do this in a very systematic way, and that means probably months. But events move at a very fast pace here, particularly when you have a president who's obsessed with all of this right now. And as we get more information, in some cases leaks, we may see dramatic actions moving forward fairly quickly, and not just firing Mueller and his team. The president has a very sweeping power to pardon in the Constitution. And if he starts to move forward to pardon his son, his son-in-law, Paul Manafort, and others around him, that would create its own firestorm of reaction, and it would suggest that they're guilty, too.
Everything suggests it's guilty. But I think when we now know about the Mueller investigation, it's not just about Russia and collusion, what happened with the hacking. He's hiring people who are the best in the nation in processing organized crime, of looking at money laundering, of looking at the illicit moves of kind of transnational. So this is one of the things that's leading people to speculate that he's going into something that Donald Trump has been very opaque about, which is his financial past, the failure to release tax records, and his seeming nervousness about that. So he's going to the core where our own debate politically has focused on that for a long time, and it's been a black box to us. And this may be the thing that cracks open the question of what does Donald Trump's financial past look like, and what role did the Russians have in it?
So we've been doing shows on Dakhel Washington about big issues, whether it's healthcare domestically, or dealing with ISIS in Syria and Iraq, or global politics. What impact does an investigation like this have on the daily life of a White House and the ability of a president and his administration to govern the country?
So we've seen this before, and we saw it, for example, through the multiple investigations in the Bill Clinton administration. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that happens is that almost every White House staffer becomes a target for questioning, and often it's in front of grand juries.
So let's talk for a minute then about the politics of this. For months we've been talking about the president's base of support, a strong and coherent and resilient base of support. Have they stayed strong, coherent, and resilient throughout this crisis?
I'd say relatively so. There have been while saying that the president's approval ratings are the lowest for any president that one can imagine in modern history, but nonetheless, when you look at both Republicans and you look at the level of support there, and the absence of interest in a lot of these issues that we're considering so important here within Washington, many other Americans, as you mentioned earlier, they see a high stock market, they see low unemployment rate. They're more immune to some of these things. But we don't know. Where I disagree with Norm in a friendly way is that while Donald Trump made some of these public statements, they've heard all that. The question is there evidence of Donald Trump's private statements with Russians, private statements with his staff, things that have not come up? That might begin to nudge the base of support, which is thus far stuck with him. But I should say his base of support is not enough to win elections. And so even with his so-called unmoved base that seems to be unaffected thus far by these debates we're having, he can't go into another election with just those folks. He would lose.
Well, our politics are tribal now, and a lot of the motivation for people is if he loses, that means a victory for those awful people who are our enemies on the other side, the liberal media, the Democrats, and the like. So you're going to see a lot of willingness of people to stay with him for a significant period, and that's reinforced by some of our tribal media. On Fox News, most of the news now is not about this. It's about Hillary Clinton, who's out of public life, because they're distracting. They don't want to focus on these kinds of things. And we know that, stunningly, Donald Trump Jr. admitted on Sean Hannity's show on Fox that he had met with the Russians. Over 40% of Republicans don't believe he met with the Russians because it's sort of cognitive dissonance at this point. So they may stick with him for longer, and while that's not a good formula for winning elections, what it is in the short term is a formula for keeping Republicans in Congress from attacking the president, because then they get pushback from their own base. And what's needed now in this kind of a crisis is an independent Congress that says enough of this, enough behavior. When Donald Trump speculates about firing Mueller and pardoning everybody, what you hope will happen is the Speaker of the House will say, no, you won't, because if you do those things, we will impeach you. And that
what
puts
chance
some,
of that is there?
well, very small chance, but that would put some boundaries around his behavior to keep it from reaching that crisis point. And we're not seeing that response at all from Republicans
So
in Congress.
we have less than a minute left. Just a quick prognostication from both of you. Does this fizzle out?
No.
Or does this bring to the eventual end of the Trump administration?
This becomes the defining feature of the entire Trump administration.
We're headed for, I think, a constitutional crisis. And I'm not sure whether it'll be in weeks or months, but there's every reason to believe that we're going to be in a difficult spot.
Well, on that optimistic
note, sounds like we'll be talking about this quite frequently in the months ahead. Steve, Norm, thank you very much for joining us on Dakhel Washington. بهذا نصل لنهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة وخاصة حول دار المدعي الخاص في النظام القضائي الأميركي، أرجو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على عنوان البريد الإلكتروني التالي insidewashington@elhura.com. معكم روبرت ساتلوف. شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.